There was no light seeping through my eyelids when I woke, so I didn't bother opening them. I was still tired from staying up so late, but strangely, I couldn't fall back to sleep. I lay on the bed, stiff and quiet, hoping that sleep would retake me. But instead of slipping off, I became more aware of my surroundings. I opened my eyes, put on my glasses, and took a quick look around. It was bitterly cold. You'd think that with the tent so densely packed with bodies, that it'd be a lot warmer. There would probably be some men still awake outside socializing by a roaring fire. It couldn't hurt to join them. I got up slowly, so as not to disturb anyone, and made my way out. To my surprise, I saw neither men nor fire when I stepped outside. The chilled night lay thick and dark around me, and Althea's lush moon glowed dimly in the sky. I turned to go back into the tent when an urge struck me. It was subtle but unmistakable and unsurprising, as it always only happened once I'd gotten up and moved around. I needed to pee. There was a designated trench for this sort of thing, but most of the men just wandered over to a bush or a tree. Unfortunately, I didn't exactly possess the skill needed to relieve myself that way. Dropping trow at the trench was also out of the question. Even if it was empty at the moment, anyone could have the same midnight urge as myself and wander over there. It was black as pitch, however. I could easily walk into the woods, and no one would know. The forest was dangerous at night. But it had to be safer than doing my business where someone could stumble upon me. So long as I didn't get lost, it would be fine. I checked the darkness for anyone around and quickly made my way into the woods. I'd made a terrible mistake. I knew that there was a road south of the camp, and I was sure that I could find south by watching the stars, but I wasn't as good at navigation as I thought I'd be. It was getting colder, and my stomach was empty. Would they hunt for me if they discovered I was gone? Had they perhaps discovered it already? Running away from the king's army was punishable by death, and no one would believe that I wandered into the woods to relieve myself. Of course, they would be looking for a boy named Marcus Cordale. As familiar as I was with the identity, it wasn't truly mine. It was a depressing thought for a depressingly cold night, but I didn't really know my own. Perhaps it would be a bad idea to pick a new one, maybe even a female one. Oh, goddess, wolves. I swiftly searched my surroundings to see if I could spot them. I hadn't even considered bringing a weapon with me, so there was no way that I could defend myself. My heart beat faster, and I struggled to breathe. I couldn't spot the wolves, and they didn't sound too close yet. I could still find somewhere to hide. Of course, the only things around me were trees. I'd need to find one with branches low enough to jump up to and strong enough to hold me. I'd also need to be absurdly lucky. Get back. Wait. Was someone there? In the distance? I could see a small light. I was somewhat relieved, but I couldn't just stand there and savor the feeling. I moved towards the light until I saw a young man. He was surrounded by wolves. The young man, circled by wolves, stood out clearly in the forest. His pallid skin easily marked him as someone from the former Grand Kingdom of Montecrest. He was dressed too finely to be a hunter or a traveler. Was he a traitor, perhaps? The man looked terrified, and he had dropped his gaslight lantern by a tree. Beside it lay a bottle of rum. Suddenly one of the wolves turned to look at me, and my heart jumped. It was larger than the others, its coat gray instead of white. He was probably the alpha. The beast appraised me with cold, intelligent eyes. Then it took a step towards me. Oh, goddess, what should I do? We're timed. Stand and fight, climb a tree. We're gonna call out to the young man, because he thinks he's alone. I tried to speak, but self-preservation kept me from making too much noise. The wolf took another step. The young man didn't hear me, but he spotted me, and he looked up at me with fear. I could see that he had a sword in his scabbard against his waist. Why the hell didn't he use it? We're gonna stand and fight. This is a stupid idea. Wolves or no wolves, I couldn't let the young man be devoured. I gritted my teeth and looked around. What resources were available to me? We stood in a circle of trees. The man's lantern and bottle of rum lay at the foot of the tree nearest me. At the base of a dead trunk, I could see a few brittle lengths of desiccated wood. The man had a sword at his waist, but strangely he hadn't thought to draw it. He was flailing at the wolves with both outstretched arms, which seemed to be confusing the creatures, but I didn't think that would keep them occupied for long. I needed a weapon if I wanted to help him. Tell the man to throw you his sword, take the lantern and a bottle of rum, grab a large stick from the pile of dead wood, fight the wolves with your bare hands. Maybe we can use the lantern and the rum? I seized the fallen lantern, which was still faintly aglow, and the bottle of rum. The sharp odor of the alcohol burned my nostrils. The large gray wolf now stood only a few feet away. Its impassive yellow eyes were locked on my face. I shook the lantern at the beast, but it looked unconcerned. Oh no, this wasn't going to be enough. Hit it with the lantern, douse the gray wolf with the rum. Yeah, douse it with the rum. In a flash of inspiration, I uncorked the bottle and sloshed its contents at the wolf. The beast looked completely dumbfounded. Alcohol dripped from its face and muzzle. Then it howled. The rest of the pack took notice and began to circle behind me. I grabbed a stout branch from the pile of sticks and brandished it at the injured alpha. This wasn't good. There were too many of them to fight off with such a simple weapon. I needed to think of something fast. Oh, we're gonna hit him with the lantern, now he's gonna go on fire. With all the strength that I could muster, I struck the wolf with the lantern. The effort stung my arm, and fire swirled around me. The gray wolf burst into flames and fell to the ground, writhing in agony. I am so sorry, Mr. Wolf. Self-preservation, though. The other wolves slowly backed away, fear in their eyes. Catch! He tossed his sword my way, and I snatched it up without a second thought, and instinctively assumed a fencing stance. The gray wolf rolled furiously, trying to put out the flames. This was my best chance to attack. I stabbed the animal over and over until it stopped moving. Blood stained my uniform, and it was hard not to gag at the acrid smell of burning flesh and fur. Gasping for breath, I looked up at the young man. Once the young man realized that he wasn't going to die today, he slowly regained his senses. At first, he looked like he would scream again, but when he took in a deep breath, I braced myself for the noise. But he hugged me instead. I was so surprised that I dropped the branch. You saved me! He lifted me up and swung me back and forth a little. Wow, someone that strong should have been able to save himself. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you! The man finally let go, but he kept beaming at me. I am so lucky that you were here, soldier. I would have died if not for you. My name is Alastor. Soldier? Oh, right, I was still in uniform. Marcus Cordale. He gave me a very sloppy salute before recalling how I had killed his assailant. My sword! He stared over at the sword, embedded in the wolf, then turned back to me. Oh well, no sense in getting blood all over my clothes. Besides, you seem to have that job covered. I looked down at my uniform, and I was indeed covered in blood. It had even seeped into the bandages binding my chest. I shuddered. Buck up, man! What's a little blood to a strapping young soldier like yourself? Look, I'll fix you up. I'll fix you a fire. It'll warm you right up. Alistair began to gather wood from the base of the dead tree and expertly piled it. I was starting to feel a little chilly. The weather was turning. I'll have this going in just a minute. Do you like marshmallows? Huh? This man was clearly out of his wits. I might actually fare better if I struck out to find that road again. Even returning to camp seemed like a better idea than staying here with him. But I couldn't just leave this man to die in the forest. What if the wolves returned? I had to remain here. It was the right thing to do, and he didn't seem capable of surviving on his own. You're going to love these, I promise. Unless his artless fumbling was actually a cleverly disguised magical ritual, I couldn't imagine that we would have a fire anytime soon. I took a straight stick and a block of wood from a pile and tore a sturdy cord from my uniform. It was ruined anyway. Recalling what Father had taught me, I patiently drilled into the board with a bow. Smoke began to rise, and soon I had a flame going. Ah, what a resourceful lad you are. He quickly produced a small cloth sack from his robes and emptied it into his hand. I know they're for sore throats, but I just adore them. They're perfect roasted over a fire. After snapping 2 long branches off a nearby tree, Alistair shoved the sweets onto them and moved toward the fire to roast his prize. Wait, marshmallows are good for sore throats? Weird. And then he started humming, off-key. The fire smelled saccharine. Normally this wouldn't bother me, but we'd already had a run-in with the wolves, and there was no telling what a scent like that would draw in. After a minute or two, Alistair declared the marshmallows were finished roasting and offered me one. In his excitement, he nearly got the gloppy mess onto my glasses. Just bite it off the stick. I bit into the marshmallow and was pleasantly surprised by how good it tasted. I wasn't overly fond of sweets, but right now I was willing to eat anything. Fire had made the sugary wad very sticky and stringy, so actually eating the marshmallow proved rather difficult. Alistair just laughed. That's right, use your fingers if you have to, don't be shy. He was less clumsy eating his share, and less messy. When he finished, he fetched his lantern and refilled it with gas from another small bottle. Once the flame in the lantern had been revived, he began kicking dirt into the fire. I jumped to my feet, about to protest, but there was something about his smile that stopped me. We should try to get back, don't you think? I looked back at the sword sticking out of the beast. Alistair didn't seem to be planning on taking it with him. Should I retrieve the man's sword or leave it by the wolf's body? We're going to take the sword. I walked back to the corpse, put my foot to it, and withdrew the sword. But I had expected the thin blade to be bent or broken, but amazingly it was still intact. It must have been made with very high-quality steel. The man laughed. A practical man, I see. All right, come on. He didn't wait for a reply. Instead, he walked off into the forest alone. I had little choice but to follow him to our deaths. At dawn, when we reached camp, I was conflicted. While I was happy to no longer be lost, I'd have to explain why I was gone in the first place. There were a few men out and about now. As soon as one spotted me, he rushed into the commander's tent. I closed my eyes and did my best to gather up my nerve. No matter how hard it would be, I had to explain myself. These men had no issues with killing traitors. I opened them when I heard the loud clanking of plate armor. Assistant Commander Baron was making his way over to us. I prepared for the worst. But when the assistant commander stopped in front of us, his reaction was completely different. Prince Alistair, what brings us the honor? Prince Alistair? Mad King Kendrick's only son. Well, hello there, Assistant Commander Bear, right? Nice to meet you. Prince Alistair swiftly seized the assistant commander's hand and shook it. This was the second time that I had heard someone call him Bear instead of Baron. Was it a nickname, or did people just always get his name wrong? It's a pleasure, sir. You guys weren't here when I left. The king sure does mobilize fast when he thinks there's a chance of war. You've been gone almost a year, sir. Really, that long? Well, I guess I don't have to worry about my father's birthday anymore. Alistair laughed. Baron just looked confused. Looks like your boy here is off the hook. The prince put an arm around my shoulder and pulled me into him. I could feel the bandages I used to tie my breasts down shift some. If he dirked me around too much more, there was a chance one might escape. Luckily, my uniform was baggy enough to hide it if that happened. What did he do? The assistant commander glared at me. Wonderful. And here I was hoping that I'd managed to be unbranded as a troublemaker by being so obedient yesterday. He also seemed to make note of the mess I'd made of my uniform. What did he do? He saved my life. The assistant commander stood up a little bit straighter. He must have heard me yelling while I was being attacked by the wolves. Oh, it was just awful. But then this young man swooped in, as brave as you please, and fought them all off. Competence is bred by the king's training regimen. Well, he was more than competent. He was clever. I doubt my father's stuffy rules encourage that kind of brilliance. You should have seen it. He doused the wolf with rum and set it on fire. The prince laughed again and let go of me. I'm going to need an escort to the castle. Yes, of course. I'm sure Aide Cordell would be more than happy to do that. Didn't I need my own escort to be allowed into the castle just yesterday? I nodded at the assistant commander and, for good measure, gave him a salute. He actually smiled at me. I expect that you will return promptly after escorting the prince, Aide Cordell. I nodded again. Good. Fantastic. The prince gave a single clap of joy and wrapped his arm around me again. Baron bowed. It'll be nice to have someone my own age keeping an eye on me for once. His age. The prince looked at least 5 years older than me. Was he actually much younger than that? Maybe that didn't matter so much to him, or maybe he just thought I looked older. Our arms linked and we made for the castle. Even with the prince clinging to me like a cape, I got a lot of strange looks when we arrived. What had happened with the locals here to make them so mistrustful, disdainful even, of their own soldiers? Was it because I was Lygardian? Well, I wasn't. Not really. I'd been born here at the palace, in fact. Sure, it was probably to some maid or cook, but I'd been in Rethera. Still, I felt Lygardian. Maybe that's what people could see. Probably didn't help that I had to color my hair, or that my skin had been bronzed by years of farm work. At least all that hard work kept my hands from feeling too ladylike, even if they looked it thanks to my long and slender fingers. It's nice to be home, don't you think? The prince finally let go of me and swung around to my front. You know what? You've been such a lovely companion. I'd like to give you something nice as a thanks. Oh, and also for saving me. That was splendid. Wait here for me, would you? I nodded. Fantastic. I'll be right back. The prince ran through a door and out of sight. I couldn't help but sigh. I had every intention of waiting obediently in one spot until he got back, but it felt a lot of time had passed, and people were starting to whisper about the bloody soldier standing in the castle entrance. It probably wouldn't be a bad idea to ask someone about where the prince might be. He might have gotten distracted by a shiny object or forgotten all about me. But then that might just draw more suspicion, and I really hated talking to strangers. Once the entrance was clear, I followed after the prince. I thought that I had seen him take the hall to the left, but when I turned the corner, the prince was nowhere in sight. The castle halls gave me some familiar feeling, as they had when I had entered them with Baron, but I was no more acquainted with the layout now than I was then. If I wandered blindly through them, I would just end up lost, and that would mean asking someone in the castle for help finding my way back if I couldn't find the prince first. I don't think any of the visitors in the castle would be that keen on showing me the way. I stopped to consider my options. The longer I waited here, the more suspicious I would seem. But if I were to be caught wandering, I might seem even more suspicious. From what I had seen of the prince, I couldn't believe any of the more bawdy stories told about him. But if he was the type to leave people in awkward situations like this, perhaps some of the tales were true. I had to make up my mind. We're gonna stay put. No, it would be best if I just stayed and waited. I didn't want to cause any more of a scene than I needed to. I stayed put, just inside the castle doors. Before long, I cursed that decision. Every time a servant wandered by, they glared at me or whispered to one another. I knew I should have stayed outside. Now that it was too late for that, I had no choice but to go and find Alistair. For all I knew, that masked man would show up again and lead me right to him. I retreated to the main hall and walked straight ahead. If the prince had gone anywhere, it made sense to look in the most obvious place first. He didn't exactly shout subtly. Fortunately, there did not seem to be many people around as I moved farther down the hall. My boots echoed on the stone floor. The noise was lonely, yet somehow comforting. It reminded me of a long time ago. I walked forward, concentrating on the sound of each step. Before visiting, I found myself before a pair of ornate doors, tall and curved, with crests and vines. I touched my hand to them to trace the patterns. It felt as though I had done so 100 times before. The wood was warm under my fingertips. Without thinking, I pushed the doors open. "Were not the terms of the agreement?" I stopped. There was a woman's voice. I only realized then that I had come to the throne room. Through the cracked door, I could see the long red carpet that ran up the hall to the throne. Someone sat on the throne, and in front of him stood a person in armor, with a shock of long red hair running down her back. This was trespassing. I shouldn't be watching. But who could be speaking so curtly to an Ortharian royal? The queen knew well what she agreed to when the arrangement was made. A second voice boomed through the chamber, much deeper than the first, and even though my view was obscured, there was no mistaking who it could be. Mad King Kendrick.